Mom kicked me out for her new family. Years later, she demands my money for her kids. Some betrayals don't happen in an instant. They unfold slowly over the years, disguised as small moments that seem insignificant at the time. I never realized I was being pushed out of my own family until it was too late. My mother had me when she was 20. My biological father never stuck around. She told me he never wanted children, and since they had only been dating for a few months when she got pregnant, she gave him the option to leave. He took it without hesitation. She insisted she had never asked for child support and that cutting ties completely was easier for both of them. I didn't question it. I grew up knowing that my father was a ghost, someone who had vanished before I could form memories of him. Despite that, my childhood wasn't bad. My mother had my grandparents' full support, and with their help she managed to finish school and secure a decent job. She dated here and there, but no one serious until she met Harry. He was a coworker of hers, and when they started dating, I was 8. They took their time and waited 3 years before getting married. He wasn't cruel to me, wasn't the kind of stepfather you see in horror stories. But he wasn't warm either. We coexisted. That was the best way to describe it. For a while, life didn't change much. Then, when I was 12, my mother got pregnant. Everyone was overjoyed, including me. I didn't realize at that moment that I was about to become an outsider in my own home. After the twins were born, something shifted. My mother became distant, wrapped up in her new life. At first, I thought it was just stress and exhaustion. She had gone from raising 1 child to 3. I gave her space and assumed things would return to normal once the twins were a little older. They never did. Over the next few years, she drifted further and further away. Conversations became brief, almost formal. My presence in the house felt like an afterthought, as if I was just another responsibility she had to manage rather than her son. Then, when I turned 16, she and Harry sat me down for a serious conversation. The words they spoke were carefully chosen, sugar-coated, and designed to sound like something reasonable. They told me they couldn't afford to keep me in the house anymore. The twins needed their full attention, their resources. They insisted that it wasn't about me, that it was about their family's future. Their family, not mine. They didn't outright kick me out. Legally, they couldn't, not until I was 18, but they made it clear that staying wasn't an option. They framed it as though I was mature enough to understand that I should be old enough to see why they had to prioritize the younger children. I sat there, listening, feeling my world crack apart. When I suggested getting a job to help with expenses, my mother shut it down instantly. She said I shouldn't have to work while in school and that the issue wasn't about money. But then she said something I will never forget. They deserve to be here more than you do. Not that they needed it more. That they deserved it. It was at that moment I realized what they had been trying to do all along. They weren't waiting for me to be old enough to move out. They were pushing me, guiding me toward the exit, hoping I'd leave on my own so they wouldn't have to force me out. And it worked. I packed my bags that night. They didn't even tell me where to go. I went straight to my grandparents' house. They were furious when I told them what had happened, but they didn't cut my mother off completely. They wanted to stay in the twins' lives, to be there for them even if they disagreed with what my mother had done. At 16, I had no choice but to start working part-time. My grandparents supported me emotionally, but they were elderly and living on a fixed income. I couldn't depend on them for everything. The next time I saw my mother was during one of her visits to my grandparents. She didn't acknowledge what had happened and didn't ask how I was doing. Instead, she acted as though nothing had changed, as if I hadn't been forced out of my home. She looked lighter, happier, as if my absence had made things easier for her. I told myself I didn't care. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. Adjusting to life outside my mother's house was harder than I wanted to admit. My grandparents were kind, but their home was small and I didn't want to be a burden. I worked after school, picking up any shifts I could find, saving every dollar in the hope that one day I'd have enough to leave town for good. Meanwhile, my mother carried on as if nothing had happened. I would hear updates from my grandparents, how the twins were growing up so fast, how she and Harry had taken them on a vacation. She never reached out to me and never checked in. I told myself I didn't care. She had made her choice, and so had I. Then, on my 18th birthday, she called. I stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether to answer. Curiosity won. "Happy birthday," she said. Her voice was warm and familiar, as if the past 2 years had never happened. "Thanks," I said flatly, waiting for the real reason she had called. She got to it quickly. "We should have dinner soon as a family." I almost laughed. As a family? The same family that had pushed me out the door without a second thought? I told her I was busy. She didn't call again. Months passed. I graduated high school, worked extra shifts, and eventually moved into a small apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Then, just as I was settling into my new life, my mother reappeared. She showed up unannounced at my job, standing at the counter like she had every right to be there. I barely recognized her. The woman in front of me was polished and expensive. A mother of two from a perfect household. I crossed my arms. What do you want? She sighed as if I was the one making this difficult. Can we talk? I glanced at the line of customers waiting behind her. I'm working. Her expression tightened. Later then. It's important. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a cafe down the street after my shift. She smiled at me like we were old friends catching up, not a mother and son with a past full of broken promises. I know things haven't been perfect between us, she started, stirring her coffee as if the words were difficult to say. But I want to fix that. I raised an eyebrow. Why now? She hesitated. Then she said the words that made my blood run cold. Because we need your help. We. Not I. Not I miss you. Not that I regret what happened. No. We need something from you. I leaned back in my chair. With what? She smiled as if she thought I would say yes. It's about your brother and sister. College is expensive and we're struggling to save enough. If you could just contribute. I laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. You kicked me out, I said, voice steady. And now you want my money? Her expression hardened. I didn't kick you out. You chose to leave. I clenched my fists under the table. There it was. The rewriting of history. The twisting of reality to suit her narrative. I stood up. We have nothing to talk about. She reached for my arm. Don't be selfish. They're your family. I pulled away. I was their family too. You didn't care then. So don't pretend to care now. Her face twisted in frustration, but she didn't argue. She knew I was right. I walked away without looking back. And this time I meant it. I thought that was the end of it. That I had made myself clear. That she would walk away just as easily as she had before. I was wrong. The messages started the next day. First, a simple, please reconsider. Then, we're still family no matter what you think. I ignored them. Then came the guilt. Your brother and sister look up to you. Don't punish them for my mistakes. My fingers hovered over the screen, but I didn't reply. She hadn't cared about how her actions had affected me, but now she wanted me to consider how mine affected them. Days passed. The texts became less polite. I don't know how you can be so heartless. I raised you better than this. I deleted every single one. Then she escalated. I got a call from my grandparents. My mother had gone to them, spinning a story that painted me as the villain. According to her, I had abandoned my siblings and refused to be a part of their lives. She made herself sound like a struggling mother, desperate to give them a better future. She's lying, I told my grandparents. They sighed. We know. I exhaled in relief. But then my grandfather hesitated. That doesn't change the fact that the twins do need help. I gritted my teeth. Not my problem. My grandmother sighed. She should never have done what she did. But are you okay with letting them suffer for her mistakes? A year ago, that question would have cracked me. I would have wrestled with the guilt, wondered if I was in the wrong, and convinced myself that my siblings were innocent in all of this. But I wasn't the same person anymore. She made her choice, I said firmly. And I'm making mine. Silence stretched between us. My grandfather finally spoke. Then you should know she's not giving up. She thinks you'll cave if she pushes hard enough. I let out a slow breath. She's wrong. But I underestimated just how far she was willing to go. 2 days later, I came home to find her waiting outside my apartment. I clenched my jaw. You shouldn't be here. She crossed her arms. I wouldn't have to be if you just listen. I folded my arms, blocking the doorway. I already did. Her eyes burned with frustration. You don't understand. I did what I thought was right back then. I had to prioritize my family. I scoffed. Your family? You mean them. Not me. She flinched but recovered quickly. That's not true. I've always cared about you. I shook my head. You only care now because you need something. Her jaw tightened. I raised you. I met her gaze without flinching. And then you threw me away. Something in her expression flickered, something close to shame. But she didn't apologize. She didn't admit the truth. Instead, she went for the last card she had. The twins still want you in their lives. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because I believed her, but because, for a brief moment, I wished they were true. I thought about my siblings, how young they had been when I left, how they had no idea why I had disappeared. But then I remembered who had kept them from me. You made sure that wouldn't happen, I said coldly. Don't pretend you care about fixing it now. She stared at me, waiting, expecting me to give in. I stepped inside and shut the door in her face. For the first time, I felt no guilt. Just relief. I expected her to give up after that. To finally accept that I wasn't going to be the answer to her problems. But people like my mother don't give up. They don't walk away unless they've taken everything they can. A few days later, I got a call from an unknown number. I usually ignored them, but something told me to pick up. It was Harry. I hadn't spoken to my stepfather since the day I left. He had never reached out, never acted like I was part of his life. Hearing his voice after all this time felt unnatural, like a piece of a past I had long since left behind. We need to talk, he said. I nearly laughed. No, we don't. He sighed. Look, I know things have been rough, but you're still part of this family. The audacity made my skin crawl. No, I'm not. You don't mean that. I do. A pause. Then, the real reason for the call. Your mother told me you refused to help the twins with college. I don't get it. Why are you being so stubborn? There it was. The same demand, just through a different voice. I gritted my teeth. Because I owe them nothing. He exhaled sharply. They're your siblings. I clenched the phone tighter. And where were you when I was 16 and had nowhere to go? Where was your concern then? Silence. That's what I thought, I said and hung up. I blocked his number before he could try again. I should have known that shutting him down wouldn't be enough. That my mother still had more moves left. The next day, I got a message from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Hey man, not sure if you've seen, but your mom posted something online. You might want to check it out. My stomach twisted. I opened the link he sent and sure enough, there it was. A long, emotional post from my mother painting herself as the struggling mother of 3 who had been abandoned by her eldest child. She wrote about how heartbroken she was that I had turned my back on family and how she had only ever wanted the best for me. The comments were exactly what you'd expect. You're such a strong mother. I can't believe your child would do this to you. You gave him everything and this is how he repays you? Strangers were pitying her, defending her, buying into her story without knowing the truth. For a brief moment I considered responding, exposing her as the liar she was. But then I stopped myself. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to fight back so she could twist it even further. I wasn't giving her that satisfaction. Instead, I did the one thing she never expected. I ignored her. Days passed. Then a week. The post lost traction. People moved on as they always do. The pity party she had thrown for herself didn't get her what she wanted. Then one evening I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. I'm sorry about Mom. I didn't know she was going to do that. I froze. It was my sister, the sibling I hadn't spoken to in years. And for the first time I felt something I hadn't expected. Doubt. Had she reached out on her own? Or was this just another one of my mother's games? I stared at the message, rereading it over and over. My sister. Someone I hadn't spoken to in years reaching out now after everything. Part of me wanted to believe she was genuine, that maybe she had started to see through the lies. But the timing made me hesitate. My mother had just tried to manipulate me publicly and now suddenly my sister wanted to talk. I didn't reply right away. I let the message sit and let my thoughts settle. Hours passed before I finally responded. Why are you reaching out now? Her reply came quickly. Because I miss you. Because I hate what Mom did. A small part of me softened. I thought back to when she was just a kid, how she used to follow me around, looking up to me. Before her mother turned me into a stranger in her life. But I wasn't naive anymore. Did Mom ask you to message me? A long pause. Then, no. She doesn't know I'm doing this. I wanted to believe her. I really did. Then why now? Why not years ago? She hesitated again. Because I thought she was right. About you. About everything. But after what she did online, I don't know anymore. Something in my chest tightened. This was what my mother had never wanted, doubt. The moment she lost her grip on the story, cracks started to form. My sister had spent years believing whatever she was told. But now, she wasn't so sure. I took a breath. If you want to know the truth, we can talk. But only if this is coming from you, not her. There was another pause before she finally replied. I want to hear your side. We met at a small cafe a few days later. It was strange to see her in person after so many years. She was taller and more grown up, but there was still something familiar in her eyes. She fidgeted with her drink, avoiding my gaze. Mom doesn't know I'm here. I leaned back, arms crossed. Then why are you? She hesitated. I don't know who to believe anymore. I sighed. Then let me make it easy for you. Tell me what she's been saying. She swallowed hard. That you left on your own. That you didn't want to be part of the family. That you were selfish for cutting us off. Of course, the same twisted version of events my mother had fed to everyone else. I met her eyes. Do you want to know the truth? She nodded. So I told her everything. The moment they sat me down and told me they couldn't afford to keep me. The way they framed it like I was the one choosing to leave. How I had to work just to survive while they carried on like I never existed. She sat there, listening, not interrupting. And by the time I was finished, she looked pale. I didn't know, she whispered. I shrugged. You weren't supposed to. Her hands tightened around her cup. I thought you hated us. I let out a sharp breath. No, I hated what she did. And I hated that no one ever questioned it. She nodded slowly, staring at the table. I'm sorry. It wasn't much. It didn't change the past. But it was the first real thing I had heard from my family in years. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough to start something new. My sister and I sat there for a long time, neither of us speaking. The weight of the past years hung between us, heavy and unspoken. She had believed my mother's version of events for so long. So much that I wondered if she was truly ready to see the truth. Finally, she exhaled. I don't know what to do. I studied her carefully. What do you mean? She hesitated. Mom. She's not going to stop. She thinks if she keeps pushing, you'll give in. I scoffed. She's wrong. I know that, she said quickly. But she doesn't. And Harry keeps backing her up. He thinks you're just being difficult. I wasn't surprised. My stepfather had never cared about me beyond what was convenient for him. To him, I was just a problem that had finally solved itself when I walked out. My sister stirred her drink absently. I don't know how to feel about any of this. I mean, she's still our mom. I didn't respond right away. I had spent years resenting my mother, carrying the anger of what she had done. But now, I just felt empty toward her. I'm not asking you to pick a side, I finally said. But you need to decide if you're okay with being manipulated like I was. She bit her lip. I don't know how to separate the truth from the lies anymore. I sighed. Then maybe you need some distance. She looked up at me sharply. Distance? From her? I clarified. From all of it. You can't see clearly when you're stuck in the middle. She didn't answer right away, but I could tell my words hit something deep. For the first time, she was questioning everything. And that meant my mother was losing her grip. I didn't expect my sister to make a decision overnight. People don't just walk away from their reality that easily. But something had changed. She started texting me. Small things at first. Asking about my job, my life, and things she had never bothered with before. First, I was cautious. I had spent too many years being burned by this family to trust anything easily. But little by little, I let her in. Then one night she called me. Mom found out I met with you. I sat up straight. How? I don't know. But she's furious. That didn't surprise me. My mother didn't lose control often, but when she did, it was ugly. What did she say? I asked. She called me ungrateful, my sister admitted. Said you were just using me to get back at her. I let out a sharp laugh. That sounds about right. She hesitated. She told me to stop talking to you. I clenched my jaw. And what do you want to do? Silence. Then softly, I don't want to lose you again. Something in my chest tightened. I had spent years believing my siblings had been lost to me forever. That my mother had erased me from their lives so thoroughly that there was no coming back. But now, my sister was standing at the edge of the same choice I had once made. And for the first time, I wasn't alone in it. Then don't let her decide for you, I said quietly. Her breath wavered on the other end. I won't. That was all I needed to hear. The moment my sister chose to keep me in her life, my mother lost control over her. I don't think she realized it at first. She probably assumed my sister would cave under pressure, that she would fall in line like always. But as the days passed and my sister didn't break, the messages from my mother became desperate. She called. My sister didn't answer. She sent texts filled with guilt and manipulation. My sister ignored them. And then, when none of that worked, she showed up at my sister's apartment. She told me about it afterward, her voice shaking, but steady. She tried to tell me you were dangerous. I exhaled sharply. Of course she did. She said you were trying to turn me against her, that you were bitter, jealous of the life she gave us. I let out a hollow laugh. The life she gave you? That's what I said, she admitted. I told her that kicking you out wasn't something a mother should have done, that she can't rewrite history just because it's convenient for her. I was stunned. You said that? She hesitated, then nodded. I don't think I've ever seen her so angry, but I didn't back down. For the first time, my sister had seen my mother for who she was, and she had chosen to stand on her own. I sighed. So what now? I don't know, she admitted. She's my mom, but I don't think I can trust her anymore. I understood that better than anyone. You don't have to decide everything right now, I said. Just do what feels right for you. She was quiet for a long moment. What felt right was reaching out to you. And with that, I knew. My mother had lost. Not because she had been exposed or because she faced any real consequences. People like her rarely do. She lost because, for the first time, her manipulation didn't work. She lost because I was no longer someone she could control. She lost because the person she had tried to erase, her son, wasn't gone after all. And in the end, she was left with nothing but the lies she had built her life around. As for me, I was finally free. And this time, I wasn't walking away alone. Hope you enjoyed this story as much as I do. Help this small channel grow by hitting that like button, subscribing, and sharing with your friends. Every bit of support means the world. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.